You stand in a stone chamber at Langeais, 1473. Beeswax and wet wool mix in the air. The bedding ritual waits behind a carved door. Courtiers whisper about dynastic heirs. You feel the timber floor vibrate under hurried steps. If this night goes wrong, alliances fail. If it goes right, a girl becomes the hinge of a house. Do you step closer, or do you look away? A door opens. Servants pass with linen. A priest mutters the last prayers. You hear a laugh from older nobles who think children are easy to bend. Canon law blesses this union. It says, a girl of 12 can marry. You listen and keep your eyes low. The king's men do not like witnesses. The king will remember who stayed calm. A latch scrapes. Silence follows. You keep count of heartbeats. The court wants a sign by morning. The duke wants obedience. The king wants peace. You feel the pressure like a hand on your back. Will you bear it? A child bride learns power tonight. The queen was not here. France had no queen in this room. The girl was Anne of France, born in 1461, eldest surviving child of King Louis XI and Charlotte of Savoy. She married Pierre de Bourbon, later Duke of Bourbon, in 1473. She was about 12. He was much older. The match fixed a political bond the king needed. It also placed Anne beside a seasoned noble who would accept her father's plans. Canon law set the age. Custom set the stage. Witnesses stood near. Priests blessed the bed. The court measured success by morning smiles and quiet rumor. No one asked the girl what she wanted. Duty carried the night. Power hides in ceremony. Louis I worked like a spider at Plessis-les-Tours. He cut deals with towns. He broke proud lords. He watched Brittany, Burgundy, and England. He trained Anne to read faces and to keep her voice steady. He told her to wait before she spoke. He taught her to pay small sums to gain large ends. She listened. She learned to reward and to warn. She learned to look harmless until the decision was made. The king had a plan for her after his death. 3 years later, 1476, Anne moved between Bourbon lands and the royal court. She learned the weight of seals and keys. She learned how to receive embassies and how to dismiss them without insult. She watched her husband, Pierre, run councils and gather men. She wrote letters for favors and for grain. She kept the king's confidence. A quiet girl builds a network. Time passed. In 1483, news spread fast. Louis XI was dying at Plessis. His son Charles, born in 1470, was only 13. The realm shook. Great lords lifted their heads. Brittany tested the leash. Orléans counted his friends. Towns waited to see who would lead. At that edge, Anne of France stepped forward with Pierre. The council named them to guide the young king. She accepted. She had trained for this moment in silence. Would the nobles accept a woman's hand on the seal? They called her Madame la Grande. The regency began. Anne held audiences. She read petitions. She moved troops without noise. She bought time with coin and paroles. She watched for revolt and sent letters in the night. She knew the danger lay in Brittany and in the pride of Louis of Orléans, the future Louis XII. She kept the boy king close and the great lords closer. She promised order if they obeyed and ruin if they broke faith. Many bowed. Some only pretended. A revolt gathered a name. The Mad War. Open questions multiplied. Could Anne keep Brittany from splitting the realm? Could she tame Orléans without making him a martyr? She had one answer to both. It required a wedding that would change France. It required speed, secrecy, and a locked door at another chateau. Back to the chamber. You still stand by the wall. You think the night is over? You are wrong. By morning, one rumor will cross the courtyard. It will carry her new title through the halls. When the king dies, who will stop the lords at the gate? Louis I died on August 30th, 1483. Charles VIII was 13. The council named Anne of France and Pierre de Bourbon as guides. She accepted and kept the boy near. She moved quietly. She met the Estates General in 1484 and asked for order. Towns, judges, and taxmen heard her. They saw a steady hand. They saw letters with clear demands and prompt rewards. The minority would not invite chaos. Not if she could help it. Appearances would decide authority. She watched the great lords. Louis of Orléans gathered friends and debts. Brittany looked for allies. Burgundy remembered old strength. Maximilian of Austria sent words and envoys. England listened and waited. Anne set emissaries on the road. She paid captains on time. She cut gifts to flatteries that mattered. She kept the king in view at councils. She let him sign. She spoke the rest. It worked, for a season. Speed would beat pride. By 1485, the revolt had a name. They called it the Mad War. It joined Orléans, Brittany, and other malcontents. They promised freedoms the crown had not granted. They raised men and banners. Anne raised more. She trusted Louis II de la Trémoille with the field. She warned towns to hold their gates. She sent coin ahead of the troops. She kept clerks at night over rolls and seals. The court marched from crisis to crisis and did not break. A defeat can end a dynasty. On July 28, 1488, the royal army met the rebels at Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier. The crown won. The rebels broke. Orléans fell into royal hands soon after. Anne saw him confined. She kept him alive and out of sight. She did not make a martyr. Brittany paid with terms. The Treaty of Le Verger in 1488 bound the duchy. It barred a ducal marriage without the crown's consent. Francis II of Brittany died weeks later, on September 9th. His heir was his daughter, Anne of Brittany, aged 11. The realm shifted again. One clause could bind a duchess. The regent saw the path. If the king married the duchess, the realm would close around Brittany. No battle could do as much. She held Charles VIII close to council. She wrote to bishops and jurists. She asked where canon law stood. Consent made marriage. Guardianship set limits. A treaty could speak for a minor. She needed a clean claim. She needed speed. She needed the duchess in a room with the king before enemies could act. She prepared a wedding and a siege at once. She still had to tame foreign anger. Maximilian of Austria watched Brittany. He had his own designs. He had a daughter, Margaret of Austria, raised in France, and betrothed to Charles VIII. That bond served peace with the empire. Breaking it would cost lands or gold. But the crown could not let Brittany slip. Anne weighed the ledger. She chose the realm over the betrothal. She kept her plan close. Only a few read the letters. The cost would come later. Through 1489, war flickered on Breton soil. French captains pressed the ring. English and Spanish aid came and went. Rennes held. The Duchess's council argued and delayed. Some pushed for an imperial match. Some begged for peace with France. The regent tightened grain, money, and time. She sent terms. She sent threats. She sent promises for towns that opened their gates. The circle narrowed. Winter did not stop it. A vow spoken by proxy could ruin everything. In 1490, news crossed the Loire. Anne of Brittany had married by proxy to Maximilian of Austria. No priest stood at a French court. No royal consent sealed it. But the ceremony bound her abroad. It mocked the Treaty of Le Verger. It mocked the regent's warnings. The duchess had chosen her own protector. The empire took the role of husband from a distance. The plan at Langers faced a wall. Anne of France did not yield. She called councils. She counted the risks. She set the army on a single goal: bring the duchess within reach of the king. She would break the proxy with presence and consent. She would use law and force together. The stakes were now the map of France and the face of the crown. At Rennes, the bells rang at dusk. Inside the walls, the young duchess listened to divided counsel. Outside, royal tents dotted the roads. One winter morning, a sealed letter left the regent's hand. Its orders fit on one page. If the gates opened, the wedding would follow at once. Would they open the city before the Empire intervened? Rennes held while winter rain soaked the tents. Drums beat in muddy lanes. Inside, the Duchess heard divided counsel. Outside, Louis II de la Trémoille tightened the ring. Anne of France read each report before dawn. She paired threats with terms. She offered safe conduct and grain. She warned the city that rescue would not come in time. Law would decide a duchy. The proxy stood on parchment in 1490. Maximilian of Austria had married the Duchess by proxy. It lacked consummation. It lacked consent from the French crown under the Treaty of Le Verger. Jurists in Paris wrote opinions. Guardianship bound a minor. A treaty bound a house. Canon law could void a proxy if guardianship and consent were broken. Anne of France kept those findings close. She needed the gates to open before the empire could act. A sealed proxy could not stop a door. Autumn 1491. Famine pressed Rennes. Captains cut roads. Couriers slipped through at night, then vanished by morning. The Duchess's counsel faltered. Jean de Rieux urged endurance. Others begged for terms. Anne of France sent a final offer. The Duchess would keep her title and honors. Towns that yielded would keep their liberties. No sack, no revenge. One condition stood above all. The Duchess must meet the king. Speed mattered more than pride. In late November, the city agreed. The gates opened under watch. French officers entered with lists and seals. The young Duchess left Rennes with a small train. She crossed to the Loire under escort. Couriers raced ahead to prepare the chateau at Langeais. Anne of France wrote the order that mattered. The wedding must come at once. She would erase the proxy with presents, oath, and a ring. One night could bind a realm. December 6, 1491. In the hall at Langeais, the king waited with a small circle. Witnesses stood ready. The Duchess arrived in travel dress, then changed behind a screen. A bishop spoke the words. Hands met over a prayer book. Rings passed. The king accepted the Duchess as queen. The court recorded the vows. They signed the act. The bedding ritual followed in guarded quiet. By morning, messengers carried the news to Tours and Paris. Silence can crown a plan. The empire raged. Maximilian protested the insult to his house. His daughter, Margaret of Austria, lived in France as the king's betrothed. She would go home. That would cost lands, money, and diplomacy. Anne of France knew the bill would arrive. She accepted it. Unity in the West outweighed an imperial quarrel. France now wrapped Brittany with law and marriage. The map had fewer seams. A victory can breed new danger. Anne of France still watched Orléans. He had bent after Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier. He did not forgive. He stood at the edge of the king's confidence. He waited for a stumble. She kept him close enough to see and far enough to limit. She placed loyal men in chambers and treasuries. She guarded the seal. She made sure Brittany's estates acknowledged the queen's new standing. She pressed for a formal union of courts and revenues without forcing a legal annexation yet. Step by step. No shocks. Time would test the marriage. 1492 opened with a shift. Charles VIII approached more active rule. He listened to favorites and soldiers eager for glory. Italy drew their eyes. Naples tempted them. Anne of France measured the risk. War could spend treasure and pull troops away from Brittany. It could give Orléans space to move. She advised caution. She lost ground to voices that promised quick victory abroad. One campaign could undo years of work. She still held influence. She secured confirmations of rights for towns that had stayed loyal. She kept an eye on the queen's household. She taught the young queen how to use audiences and gifts. She reminded courtiers that the queen's dowry lands would be guarded. She knew that if the king died without a male heir, Brittany could slip again. A future king might need to marry the queen to hold the duchy. A price would fall on someone she loved. For now, the union stood. Orléans counted days. The empire prepared terms for Margaret's return. Italy called to the king. In a small oratory at Langeais, wax pooled by a lamp, Anne of France read a list of debts and promises. She underlined one name and paused. The path ahead would save the realm. It would break a marriage inside her own family. Whose marriage would she allow to shatter? Anne of France counted on paper as much as swords. After the wedding at Langeais, she secured one clause in the marriage contract. If Charles VIII died without a male heir, Anne of Brittany must marry his successor. Jurists copied it. Notaries sealed it. The council accepted it as prudence. She accepted it as necessity. She also knew what it meant for her own blood. Paper can outlive promises. Her younger sister, Jeanne of France, had married Louis of Orléans in 1476. Jeanne was 12. Louis was 14. The match held a faction inside the royal house. It pacified Orléans during Louis I's rule. It gave Anne of France leverage during the Regency. But Louis of Orléans wanted freedom. He wanted power. He wanted a marriage that gave lands and heirs. The clause at Langeais drew a line under Jeanne's future. A contract can choose a widow's path. The king grew restless. In 1491 to 1492, he stepped into full rule. He favored young companions who promised swift glory. They spoke of Italy, old claims to Naples and glory on the roads. Anne of France argued for caution. She lost ground. Louis of Orléans, freed and smiling, urged the march. He wanted a stage larger than the Loire. He wanted the king, far from councils where Anne kept order. Distance weakens steady hands. Autumn 1494. Charles VIII crossed the Alps. Cannon rolled on new carriages. Towns opened their gates or paid to be spared. Milan bowed. Florence bargained. Rome yielded. In February 1495, Charles entered Naples and took the crown. The triumph did not last. Venice, Milan, the Pope, the Empire, and Spain formed a league. They met the French on the way north. July 6, 1495, at Fornovo. The king cut through the trap and escaped with his army. He lost men and treasure. He kept his life. He came home to a country that had paid his bills. One victory can bleed a treasury. Anne of France managed the rear. She held Brittany quiet. She kept towns supplied. She saw garrisons starve in Naples after the king left. Spanish arms and disease drove them out in 1496. She tallied losses and wrote new taxes. She shielded the queen from open scorn. She tracked births and burials in the royal nursery. Children came, children died. No son lived to steady the future. An empty cradle threatens every plan. The clause at Langeais now mattered more. If Charles died without a son, Anne of Brittany must marry the next king. That king would be Louis of Orléans. He had never wanted Jeanne. He had wanted out since youth. He had begged for annulment. Courts had refused. Now the path was clear. If he wore the crown, he could try again. Anne of France knew it. She had written the path to save the realm. It would crush her sister's marriage. This was the hidden price. In 1497 to 1498, Anne of France watched currents. She saw Orléans gather allies at court. She saw the queen rule her household with strength. She kept her own counsel. She did not fight the clause she had chosen. She could not. Brittany tied to the crown was the point. If a widow had to remarry a new king to hold the duchy, so be it. If Jeanne lost a husband-in-law, she would not lose her dignity in Anne's house. She weighed realm against family, and did not blink. Louis of Orléans counted days. He kept near the king. He played at jousts and tennis. He joked with men who mocked the regent's caution. He did not hide his hopes. He did not hide his dislike for Jeanne. The queen prayed for a son and carried again. The court waited. Messengers watched the nursery, then rode with sad news. No boy lived to secure the throne. A clock ticks in every corridor. Anne of France moved her household to be near the king at times. She did not beg for favor. She showed results. Orders arrived, grain moved, soldiers were paid. The queen's dowry land stayed intact. She kept Jeanne close and protected. She prepared legal briefs that would defend Jeanne if Orléans attacked her marriage. She already knew how the attack would come. He would allege lack of true consent. He would allege an impediment. He would push through with the weight of a crown. The central secret stood plain. She had made that possible. Spring 1498 approached. The court gathered at Amboise. Charles VIII planned games and sport. He rose early. He walked fast. He turned down a narrow passage toward a tennis court. He lowered his head to pass a short doorway. Courtiers laughed and followed. He did not see the lintel until it was too late. The corridor at Amboise ran dark and narrow. Torches hissed. Sweat and tallow soured the air. Charles VIII walked fast toward the tennis court. Laughter followed. He ducked, late. Wood struck bone. The sound snapped through stone. He staggered. He smiled once to reassure them. Then his face drained. A doorway ended a dynasty's hope. They carried him to a small room, cold water on his temples, vinegar under his nose, curtains drawn. A priest stood near and waited. Physicians pressed his scalp with linen. Blood clotted. Breath rasped. The Queen's women sent for prayers. Courtiers left, returned, and left again. Hours crawled. He drifted in and out. Words thinned. The light failed. Silence spread faster than orders. Anne of France received the news within the walls. She did not weep in public. She cleared the room of gossips. She sent for the council. She ordered guards to hold the gates. She told clerks to prepare proclamations if the worst came. She kept the Queen undisturbed for as long as she could. She had no more levers to pull on the body of a dying king. Duty held, while breath shortened. Everything she had written now stood ready. The clause at Langeais bound the path. If the king left no son, the Queen must marry his successor. The successor would be Louis of Orléans. Jeanne of France would not remain his wife if he could help it. He would claim a marriage without true consent. He would push for freedom. He would wear the crown and test the law. One woman would save a duchy, another would lose a husband. Anne moved through the antechambers with measured steps. She spoke softly to officers. She called in La Trémoille. She repeated the rules for the transfer of power. No one would seize a treasury tonight. No lord would raise a banner on rumor. She knew the city outside listened for bells. She kept the bell ropes in trusted hands. Control the first hour. Control the day. In the dining room, the king labored for breath. Candles guttered. Wax slid. A clock ticked. A priest murmured prayers for the departing. Men took off their hats. Women knelt. The Queen pressed a cloth and waited. No one spoke the word heir. No one spoke Brittany. They did not need to. Every eye knew the path the law had drawn. A vow in one hall would force another. Anne of France thought of Jeanne, a girl wed at 12 to tame a prince. A wife who had obeyed. A sister who asked little and gave much. Anne had promised to defend her dignity. She could not defend the bond now. The realm came first. The clause had always pointed here. It would hold the map. It would break the bed. A choice made years ago arrived tonight. Near midnight, the king's chest fell and did not rise. The priest spoke the final words. The room froze. Then movement returned. Men wept. Some hid their faces. Candles were snuffed and relit. The Queen gripped the bedpost and closed her eyes. Officers stepped out to carry the news. Outside, the bell sounded slow and even. Amboise understood. A crown passes before dawn. Anne sent 2 messages at once. One to secure the treasuries and the seals. One to summon Louis of Orléans. He would come as king. He would come with demands. The law of succession gave him the crown. The marriage clause gave him the Queen of Brittany. Jeanne's fate would stand before judges. They would ask about consent. They would ask about impediment. They would ask while a king waited for their answer. The verdict would cut more than vows. Anne took a seat at a small table. She set her hands flat. She called for ink. She wrote the first orders of a new reign. Guards at gates. Oaths from captains. Comfort for the queen. Respect for the late king. No disorder. No delay. She paused at one name on the list and drew a single line. At sunrise, the doors would open for Louis. Would Jean walk out honored or dismissed? At sunrise on April 8, 1498, Louis of Orléans entered as king. He became Louis XII by right. He spoke of order and mercy. He also spoke of freedom from Jeanne. Anne of France stood beside the council table and watched faces. She kept the seals steady. She let the new king make the first move. First hours set habits. Louis petitioned Rome at once. He sought annulment from Pope Alexander VI. He claimed lack of true consent in 1476. He claimed impediment by kinship. He wanted speed. He wanted the Queen of Brittany. Anne of France did not fight the petition. The clause at Langeais guided her still. A widowed Anne of Brittany must marry the successor. If Rome agreed, the path would clear. Law moved faster than rumor. In December 1498, the papal court granted the annulment. Jeanne lost her crown as wife. She kept honor. Louis created her Duchess of Berry. Anne of France received her into safety and respect. Jeanne founded a religious house, the Order of the Annunciation, in 1501. She lived quietly at Bourges until 1505. Later ages called her blessed. Anne of France had defended Jeanne's dignity as far as law allowed, a promise kept at a cost. January 1499, Louis XII married Anne of Brittany at Nantes. He fulfilled the clause. He secured the duchy again by marriage. The contract preserved Breton rights and customs. The union held. The map stayed closed along the west. The empire protested. Spain noted the shift. France did not yield. Anne of France had written this ending years earlier. Brittany stayed under the French crown. She did not return to a regency. She returned to rule in Bourbon lands. Pierre de Bourbon died in 1503. Their only child, Suzanne, stood as heir. Anne protected the succession against rival Bourbon claims. She arranged Suzanne's marriage to Charles of Montpensier in 1505. She balanced factions with the same tools she had used at court: letters, grants, and measured threats. She kept moulins orderly and rich. Local order proves real power. Around 1503 to 1504, she set pen to paper for her daughter. She wrote, "Lessons for my daughter." It taught caution, patience, and the use of small gifts for large ends. It warned against rash words. It praised steady accounts and loyal servants. It showed the logic of her life in short lines. No flourishes, no idle dreams. She taught the craft of rule to a girl born to carry keys. A mother wrote the manual she had lived. At court, Louis XII governed with calmer hands than Charles. Wars continued in Italy, then bent to treaty. The Queen of Brittany bore daughters. Claude of France would matter later. Brittany remained tied by marriage and contracts. The full legal union would come after Anne's death, but the hinge had set in 1491 and 1499. Her clause had made reversals hard. A single sentence can bind a coast. Anne of France kept writing letters from Moulins. She brokered peaces between neighbors. She lent money to towns. She called in favors from old captains. She never staged a triumph. She did not need parades. She measured success in quiet days and balanced ledgers. In 1522, she died at Chantelle. Clerks closed her accounts. Priests said the prayers. Her daughter had died the year before. Her work still held. Results outlast noise. The two open questions had answers now. Jeanne left marriage but kept honor, rank, and a work of faith. Brittany stayed with France by oaths and rings, not by sack and ruin. Anne had chosen the realm over a sister's bond. She had done it with a clause, a siege, and a locked door at Langeais. Choice shapes, crowns more than swords. You stand again in that stone chamber. Wax smells sweet and sharp. Linen rustles behind the screen. You hear low voices and the scrape of a latch. You now know what that knight purchased and who paid. Would you write the same clause if your sister stood in its path? Power demands names on the line. Put yours there, then learn what it costs.